Nobody could follow the plot. Not the actors, not the director, not even the writer who adapted it. The Big Sleep wasn't just noir, it was beautiful chaos wrapped in cigarette smoke and sexual tension so thick the censors nearly lost their minds. But behind Bogart's trench coat and Bacall's smirk, the production was falling apart. Scenes were reshot a year later, entire characters vanished without explanation. And one murder. Nobody ever figured out who did it. These are 20 weird facts about The Big Sleep. And wait for the bonus, because there's a completely different version of this film that most people have never seen. Light a cigarette. This one's about to get complicated. Howard Hawks didn't want to make The Big Sleep. He'd just finished To Have and Have Not with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and the studio was already pushing him toward another project. But Jack Warner had bought the rights to Raymond Chandler's detective novel for $50,000, a massive sum in 1945, and he needed his best director to make sense of it. Hawks read the book and immediately saw the problem. It was a masterpiece of atmosphere and dialogue, but the plot was a labyrinth. Characters appeared and disappeared, motives shifted, bodies piled up without clear resolution. Chandler himself admitted he wrote by instinct, not structure. He'd start a chapter, throw in a murder when things got slow, and figure it out later. Hawks knew adapting this would be a nightmare, but Warner sweetened the deal. He offered Hawks complete creative control, a bigger budget, and the promise that he could reunite Bogart and Bacall, Hollywood's hottest new couple both on screen and off. Hawks agreed, but only on one condition. He told Warner, "Don't ask me to explain the story because I can't." Warner laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. From day one, The Big Sleep was a film built on vibes, not logic, and somehow that became its greatest strength. William Faulkner was one of the greatest American novelists of all time, Nobel Prize winner, literary genius, master of Southern Gothic prose. And in 1945, he was broke, drinking heavily, and desperate for work. So he took a job at Warner Brothers as a contract screenwriter, churning out dialogue for $300 a week. When Hawks needed someone to adapt The Big Sleep, he called Faulkner. Not because the book matched his style, but because Faulkner was fast, reliable, and could write through anything, hangovers included. Faulkner sat down with Chandler's novel and immediately got lost. The plot twisted back on itself. Clues led nowhere. So he gave up trying to make sense of it and focused on the dialogue. He sharpened Chandler's wisecracks, added sexual innuendo wherever the censors might miss it, and built scenes that crackled with tension even if they didn't move the story forward. Hawks loved it. Faulkner, however, hated Hollywood. At one point, he asked Hawks if he could work from home. Hawks said yes, assuming he meant his hotel. Faulkner meant Mississippi. He vanished for 2 weeks, leaving the production scrambling. When The Big Sleep started shooting in October 1944, it had a clear release plan. Finish filming by January, edit through spring, release by fall. But then something strange happened. The war ended. And suddenly, Warner Brothers had a problem. They'd stockpiled war films, propaganda pieces, and patriotic dramas, all of which needed to be released before the public moved on. So, The Big Sleep got shelved. Not because it was bad, but because it wasn't urgent. It sat in the vault for months while the studio focused on other projects. But during that time, something else happened. Lauren Bacall's career stalled. Her follow-up film, Confidential Agent, bombed. Critics said she couldn't carry a picture without Bogart. Her agent panicked. If Bacall was going to survive in Hollywood, she needed The Big Sleep to be a hit. But there was a problem. In the original cut, her role was secondary. She was sexy, sure, but not central. So her agent made a desperate move. He convinced Jack Warner to bring the cast back for reshoots. Not to fix the plot, nobody cared about that, but to add more scenes of Bacall and Bogart flirting, teasing, and smoldering at each other. Hawks agreed. In early 1945, months after filming had wrapped, the cast reassembled. They shot new scenes, rewrote old ones, and trimmed anything that didn't feature the two leads eye-fucking each other. The result? The Big Sleep became less of a detective story and more of a love story disguised as noir. And it worked. When it finally hit theaters in August 1946, audiences didn't care about the plot. They came for the chemistry. During production, the cast and crew ran into a problem. There's a scene where a chauffeur is found dead in a car, apparently murdered. It's a key moment in the film. But as they were shooting later scenes, someone on set asked the obvious question. Who killed the chauffeur? Hawks didn't know. He turned to his screenwriter. Faulkner didn't know either, so Hawks did something almost unheard of. He sent a telegram to Raymond Chandler, the author of the original novel, and asked him directly. Chandler read the telegram, thought about it, and sent back a reply that became legendary in Hollywood. I don't know. He admitted he'd never figured it out. When he was writing the book, he needed a body, so he killed the chauffeur. He assumed he'd explain it later, but he never did. And by the time the book was published, it was too late to change it. Hawks read Chandler's response and started laughing. If the author didn't know, why should they? So they kept filming. The chauffeur's death remains unsolved to this day, one of the great mysteries in cinema. Not because it's brilliantly ambiguous, but because nobody, not even the man who wrote it, could figure out who did it. In a film built on confusion, it was the most honest moment of all. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some are just meant to look cool in the fog. Humphrey Bogart was 45 years old when he played Philip Marlowe. Lauren Bacall was 20. The age gap was massive, even by 1940s standards. But on screen, it didn't matter. They moved like equals, traded barbs like sparring partners, and generated heat that made audiences forget everything else. But off-screen, the relationship was complicated. Bogart was still married to his third wife, Mao Method, a volatile actress infamous for her jealous rages. She'd show up on set drunk, screaming at Bogart, accusing him of cheating, which he was, with Bacall. Their affair had started during To Have and Have Not, and by the time The Big Sleep began shooting, they weren't even trying to hide it. Hawks knew what was happening but didn't care. The affair made the performances better. That wasn't acting. That was real desire bleeding through every frame. Every sultry glance, every loaded line. It wasn't just scripted seduction. It was two people falling in love in front of the cameras while the world outside tried to tear them apart. And somehow, that made it even more electric. The production code, Hollywood's moral censorship board, had a field day with The Big Sleep. They flagged dozens of scenes, too much innuendo, they said, too suggestive, too much sexual tension. But Hawks was a master at getting around them. He didn't remove the sex, he just made it subtext. Take the famous horse racing scene. Bacall and Bogart sit in a restaurant, talking about horses, jockeys, and whether she's been hard to handle. On the surface, it's about racing, but every line drips with double meaning. The censors read it, couldn't find anything explicitly sexual, and let it pass. Hawks smiled and kept going. He did the same thing throughout the film. Characters talk about gambling, books, rain, all of it coded language for desire, danger, and dominance. The code demanded purity, so Hawks gave them purity wrapped in sin. The result was one of the most sexually charged films of the 1940s, and technically, it didn't violate a single rule. The censors were furious but powerless. They knew what Hawks was doing. They just couldn't prove it. And by the time audiences saw the film, they understood every word, every pause, every glance. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can show on screen isn't what you see, it's what you imagine. And The Big Sleep left plenty to the imagination. Martha Vickers played Carmen Sternwood, the wild, unhinged younger sister at the center of the mystery. She was 21 years old, stunning, and she stole every scene she was in. In the original 1945 cut of the film, her role was much larger. She had more screen time, more dialogue, more moments to shine. Critics who saw early test screenings said she was a revelation. But then, the reshoots happened, and suddenly her part got smaller. Scenes were trimmed. Her most powerful moments were cut, or reshot with less focus on her. Why? Because she was too good. Warner Brothers and Hawks realized that Vickers was overshadowing Lauren Bacall, and that was a problem. Bacall was the star they were building, the face they needed to sell. Vickers was contract player, talented but expendable. So they made a choice. They cut her down to elevate Bacall. It wasn't about making the movie better, it was about protecting their investment. Vickers never knew. She showed up for reshoots, performed brilliantly, and assumed her career was about to explode. But when the film hit theaters, audiences barely saw her. She went on to act in other films, but none had the impact of The Big Sleep. And the version of the movie where she truly shined, the 1945 cut, it wouldn't be seen by the public for over 40 years. She wasn't erased, but she was dimmed. And in Hollywood, sometimes that's the same thing.
Come on, wake up.
I know you. Doghouse run.
Film noir is defined by its look. Deep shadows, low-key lighting, rain-soaked streets. And The Big Sleep had one of the greatest cinematographers in the business to create it. Sidney Hickox had already shot dozens of films, but this one pushed him further than ever before. Hawks wanted the film to feel like it was happening at night, even when it wasn't. So Hickox used a technique called day for night, shooting during the day, but using filters, underexposure, and careful lighting to make it look like evening. It was painstaking work. Every shot had to be measured, tested, adjusted. One scene, a confrontation in a car, took 14 hours to light properly. The actors sat in a vehicle rigged with reflectors, scrims, and lights carefully positioned to create the illusion of passing street lamps. Studio executives kept pushing for faster turnarounds, shorter days, cheaper setups. Hickox refused. He told them, "You want it fast, or you want it to look like a dream." They chose the dream, and what he created became the blueprint for noir cinematography for decades. Film noir doesn't just happen. It's built, frame by frame, shadow by shadow. The Big Sleep is famous for its dialogue, fast, sharp, loaded with subtext. But during filming, the actors had trouble keeping up. Bogart, a seasoned pro, could handle Chandler's rhythms. But some of the supporting cast struggled. Lines were flubbed, takes were ruined, and Hawks, normally patient, started losing his temper. At one point, he pulled the cast aside and told them, "You're not having a conversation, you're playing jazz. Every line is a beat. If you miss the beat, the whole thing falls apart." He made them rehearse scenes like musicians, finding the tempo, the pauses, the moments to hit hard and when to pull back. And it worked. The dialogue doesn't sound written. It sounds improvised, alive, dangerous. But it wasn't improvised. It was carefully orchestrated, every word timed to the second. That scene in Marlowe's office, where Bacall and Bogart trade lines without breathing, that wasn't luck. That was rehearsed 40 times until every syllable landed exactly where it needed to. Film acting isn't just about emotion. Sometimes it's about timing, and The Big Sleep had perfect timing. By the time filming wrapped in January 1945, everyone involved knew they'd made something strange. It was beautiful, sure, atmospheric, sexy, brilliantly acted. But it didn't make sense. Scenes felt disconnected. Plot lines went nowhere. And that final cut, the one that sat on a shelf for over a year, it was even more confusing. Warner Brothers panicked. They'd spent a fortune on this film, and they weren't sure audiences would sit through it. So they held test screenings. And something unexpected happened. People loved it. They didn't care about the plot. They didn't ask who killed who or why characters disappeared. They just wanted to watch Bogart light a cigarette and Bacall destroy him with a glance. The studio realized they had accidentally made something new, a film where story didn't matter, only mood, style, and chemistry. And that terrified them. Because if The Big Sleep worked, it meant everything they thought they knew about storytelling was wrong. It meant audiences didn't need clear answers. They just needed to feel something. And The Big Sleep made them feel everything. Desire, danger, confusion, all of it wrapped in shadows and smoke. So Warner Brothers made a choice. They stopped trying to fix it. They leaned into the chaos. And when the film finally hit theaters in 1946, it became a phenomenon, not despite its flaws, but because of them. Elisha Cook Jr. played Harry Jones, a small-time hood caught in a web of lies, betrayal, and murder. He only appears in a handful of scenes, but his death is one of the most haunting moments in the film. Jones sits across from a killer, drinks poisoned whiskey, and dies slowly, gasping for air, collapsing onto the floor. It's brutal, unglamorous, and unforgettable. But what most people don't know is that Cook insisted on doing the scene in one take with no safety net. Hawks wanted to shoot it in pieces, cut away, use camera tricks to soften the impact. Cook refused. He said, "If this guy dies ugly, I die ugly." So they rolled cameras and Cook performed the entire sequence without stopping. He drank the prop whiskey, started convulsing, grabbed his throat, stumbled, and collapsed, all while staying in character. The crew stood in silence. Nobody yelled, "Cut," nobody moved. When Cook finally stood up, brushing himself off, the entire set erupted in applause. Hawks kept the take exactly as filmed. No edits, no music, just a man dying alone in a room while the world moves on without him. It's one of the darkest moments in classic Hollywood cinema, and it happened because a character actor refused to take the easy way out. Cook wasn't a star. He was never going to be leading man. But in that one scene, he showed everyone on set what real acting looked like. No vanity, no protection, just truth.
You're looking for something. Will you pay for it?
If it does what?
Helps you find Regan.
If you're paying close attention during the big sleep, you might notice something odd. Locations don't match. A character walks into a building in one shot, but the interior doesn't match the exterior. A car drives down a street that shouldn't connect to where they just were. Room layouts shift between scenes. It wasn't sloppy filmmaking, it was necessity. The Big Sleep was shot on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, but it was set in Los Angeles. Hawks needed the city to feel real, lived in, dangerous. So the crew spent weeks scouting actual LA locations, shooting exterior footage of streets, buildings, neon signs, all the atmosphere they could capture. Then they'd return to the studio and recreate interiors that roughly matched but didn't have to be exact. The result was a Los Angeles that felt authentic but existed entirely in the imagination. Streets connected in ways they shouldn't. Buildings had impossible geography. The city became a labyrinth, which was perfect for a film where nothing made sense anyway. Hawks later admitted he wasn't trying to recreate LA. He was trying to create a dream version of it, a place that felt real but operated on dream logic. You could get lost in this city. You could walk into a bookstore and never find your way out. And that disorientation, that sense of being trapped in a beautiful nightmare, it became part of the film's identity. The Big Sleep doesn't take place in Los Angeles. It takes place in the idea of Los Angeles, and that's far more dangerous. Dorothy Malone had a small role in The Big Sleep, playing a nameless bookstore clerk who appears in one scene. She's at her counter, wearing glasses, buttoned up, prim. Then Marlowe walks in. It starts raining. She closes the shop, and suddenly, in the span of about 3 minutes, she transforms. She takes off her glasses, lets down her hair, pours 2 drinks, and the entire scene becomes charged with sexual electricity. It's one of the most iconic sequences in the film, and Malone shot it all in a single afternoon. Hawks gave her almost no direction. He just told her, "You're bored, and he's interesting. Show me what happens." Malone, who was only 20 years old and relatively inexperienced, took a chance. She played the scene like a woman who'd been waiting her whole life for someone dangerous to walk through that door. The chemistry between her and Bogart was instant. They didn't rehearse, they just let it happen. And when Hawks yelled cut, he knew he had something special. 3 minutes on screen, no name, and immortality. Max Steiner was one of Hollywood's greatest composers, the man behind Gone with the Wind and Casablanca. But when it came to The Big Sleep, Hawks had a different idea. He didn't want a big, sweeping score. He wanted silence, or close to it. Steiner was furious. He'd been brought in to create music, and now the director was telling him to use as little as possible. But Hawks was insistent. He believed that in a film this tense, this loaded with subtext, music would get in the way. He wanted audiences to hear every footstep, every breath, every pause in the dialogue. So, Steiner composed a minimal score, brief cues that appeared only when absolutely necessary. Most of the film plays out with no music at all, just ambient sound, the creak of floorboards, rain on windows, the distant hum of the city. It was a radical choice for 1940s Hollywood, where orchestral scores dominated every frame. But it worked. The silence made everything more intimate, more immediate. You weren't watching a movie. You were in the room with these people, hearing what they heard, feeling what they felt. Steiner hated it. He felt his work was being wasted, buried under Hawks' obsession with realism. But years later, he admitted Hawks was right. The Big Sleep didn't need music to tell you how to feel. It needed space for you to figure it out yourself. And in that space, in those quiet moments where nothing happens except 2 people looking at each other, the film found its power. The Big Sleep had two endings, and most people have only seen one. In the original 1945 version, the film ends with Marlowe standing in the rain, calling the police, alone. It's bleak, uncertain, noir in its purest form. The case is solved, but nothing feels resolved. Marlowe walks away into the darkness, and you're left wondering if anything he did even mattered. It was perfect, but test audiences hated it. They wanted closure, hope, something to hold on to. So, during the 1945 reshoots, Hawks and the studio crafted a new ending. Marlowe still solves the case, but now Bacall is there with him. They stand together in the shadows, and she delivers a line about being afraid. He responds with something reassuring, and they walk off together. Fade to black. It's softer, more romantic, more hopeful, and it tested much better. So that's the version that played in theaters in 1946, and it's the version most people know. But in 1997, the original 1945 cut was finally released, and film scholars lost their minds. Suddenly, there were two big sleeps, two different films with two different souls. The 1945 version is darker, stranger, more ambiguous. The 1946 version is sexier, more commercial, more about the love story. Neither is wrong. They're just different answers to the same question. What kind of film is The Big Sleep? A detective story or a romance? And the answer, somehow, is both. Raymond Chandler hated the movie. He never said it publicly while he was alive, but in private letters to friends, he tore it apart. He said Hawks had taken his carefully constructed mystery and turned it into a fashion show. He complained that the plot, already complex in his novel, had been made incomprehensible on screen. He was furious that scenes had been added just to showcase Bacall's legs and Bogart's smirk. He felt betrayed. But here's the thing, Chandler was wrong. Or, at least, he was wrong about what mattered. The Big Sleep wasn't successful because of its plot. It was successful because Hawks understood something Chandler didn't. Movies aren't books. They don't need tight structure and logical progression. They need feeling, atmosphere, moments that burn into your memory. And The Big Sleep had those in spades. Audiences didn't leave the theater talking about who killed who. They talked about the horse racing scene, the bookstore girl, the way Bogart lit a cigarette like it was a weapon. Chandler wanted fidelity to his vision. Hawks wanted to make people feel something. And in the end, Hawks won. The film became more famous than the book. When people think of Philip Marlowe, they don't picture Chandler's description. They picture Humphrey Bogart in a trench coat, standing in the rain, cigarette dangling from his lips. That's the power of cinema. It doesn't adapt, it transforms. And Chandler, for all his genius, never forgave Hawks for transforming his baby into something else, something bigger. The film opens with one of the most famous sequences in noir history. Marlowe arrives at the Sternwood mansion, walks through the front door, and is greeted by Carmen Sternwood, who throws herself at him with wild, unhinged energy. She's barely dressed, giggling, touching him, completely inappropriate. It's shocking, provocative, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. But that scene almost didn't happen. The censors flagged it immediately. They said Carmen's behavior was too suggestive, too sexualized, too dangerous. They wanted it cut. Hawks refused. He argued that the scene wasn't about sex. It was about mental illness, instability, danger. Carmen wasn't being seductive. She was being broken. The censors didn't buy it. They pushed back harder. So Hawks made a compromise. He agreed to tone down some of Carmen's physicality, but he kept her dialogue, her energy, her chaos. He also added a reaction shot of Bogart looking uncomfortable, almost disgusted. That reaction changed everything. Suddenly, the scene wasn't about desire. It was about Marlowe recognizing something deeply wrong. The censors approved the revised version, and Hawks walked away with a victory. He'd kept the danger, the discomfort, the sense that this house was full of poison, and he'd done it by making the audience see it through Marlowe's eyes. The Big Sleep is full of compromises like that. Hawks would give the censors what they wanted on the surface, then sneak the truth in through performance, blocking, and reaction shots. He didn't fight the code, he outsmarted it. When The Big Sleep finally premiered in August 1946, Warner Brothers threw a massive publicity campaign behind it. Posters featured Bogart and Bacall in a tight embrace with the tagline, "The violent screen's all-time rocker shocker." They sold it as a romance, an action film, a mystery, everything except what it actually was, a tone poem about moral ambiguity and sexual obsession. But it worked. The film was a box office hit, earning over $3 million in its initial run, a huge number for 1946. Critics were divided. Some praised the performances and the atmosphere. Others complained they couldn't follow the story. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it a poisonous picture and said the plot was incomprehensible. He meant it as an insult. Audiences took it as a recommendation. They packed theaters, and many returned for second and third viewings, trying to untangle the mystery. But here's the secret. It didn't matter. People weren't coming back to solve the puzzle. They were coming back to feel it again. The mood, the chemistry, the danger. The Big Sleep became a cultural phenomenon, not because it told a great story, but because it created a world people wanted to live in, even if that world was dark, confusing, and morally compromised. It proved that cinema didn't need to make sense. It just needed to make you feel. And The Big Sleep made people feel everything. Film preservation is a tricky business, and for decades, The Big Sleep existed in only one version, the 1946 theatrical release. But in the 1980s, film archivists at UCLA made a discovery. Buried in the Warner Brothers vaults was a work print of the original 1945 cut, the version that had been shelved for a year before reshoots. It was in rough shape, scratched, faded, missing some sound elements, but it was complete, and when scholars finally watched it, they realized they were seeing a completely different film. The 1945 version had more plot, more focus on the mystery, more screen time for supporting characters like Martha Vickers. It was darker, stranger, less romantic. The reshoots hadn't just added scenes, they'd changed the film's entire identity. The discovery sparked debates that continue to this day. Which version is better? Some scholars prefer the 1945 cut for its narrative coherence and its commitment to noir bleakness. Others defend the 1946 version for its electric chemistry and its willingness to prioritize feeling over structure. The truth is, both are masterpieces, both are flawed, and both are essential. In 1997, Warner Brothers released both versions on home video, allowing audiences to compare them side by side. It was a rare glimpse into the filmmaking process, showing how a single movie can have multiple lives, multiple identities. The Big Sleep isn't one film, it's two. And depending on which one you watch, you'll see a different story, feel a different mood, and leave with different questions. That's the magic and the madness of cinema. Nothing is ever finished. It just stops. The Big Sleep has been remade, referenced, and imitated countless times, but nothing has ever captured what Hawks created. In 1978, Michael Winner directed a British remake starring Robert Mitchum as an aging Marlowe. It was competent, well-acted, but lifeless. The chemistry wasn't there. The danger felt staged. The mystery, ironically, made more sense, which somehow made it less interesting. Critics dismissed it. Audiences ignored it, because The Big Sleep was never about the plot. It was about Bogart and Bacall, about Sidney Hickox's shadows, about William Faulkner's dialogue, about Hawks' refusal to play by the rules. It was about a perfect storm of talent, chaos, and accident. You can't remake that. You can't bottle it. You can only watch it and marvel at how something so broken could feel so complete. The film's influence is everywhere. Every detective movie with a world-weary hero. Every noir with sexual tension crackling under the dialogue. Every film that chooses mood over clarity. They all owe something to The Big Sleep. And yet, none of them have matched it, because Hawks and his team didn't set out to make a great film. They set out to make something they didn't understand. And in that uncertainty, that willingness to embrace confusion, they created something timeless. The Big Sleep doesn't answer questions, it asks them. And 75 years later, we're still trying to figure out the answers. During filming, Humphrey Bogart developed a signature gesture that became iconic. The way he'd touch the brim of his hat while talking to a woman. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't discussed. It just happened during an early take with Lauren Bacall, and Hawks told him to keep doing it. So Bogart did, in scene after scene, a small, unconscious gesture that conveyed respect, flirtation, and distance all at once. But here's what most people don't know. the hat Bogart wore throughout The Big Sleep wasn't a costume piece. It was his personal fedora, one he'd worn for years, broken in, shaped to his head. He refused to wear a new one. He said new hats don't move right, don't sit right, don't feel real. So the wardrobe department let him keep it, and that hat, sweat-stained, worn, perfectly molded to Bogart's skull, became as much a part of Philip Marlowe as the trench coat or the cigarette. After filming Wrapped, Bogart took it home. He wore it in other films. He wore it in life. And when he died in 1957, Lauren Bacall kept it. She never wore it, never displayed it. She just held on to it, a piece of the man she loved, and the film that brought them together. That hat wasn't just a prop, it was a witness, and somewhere in a private collection, it still exists. Silent, battered, holding the memory of a film that nobody understood, but everyone felt.